True. Let's go to Comma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. The drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.
So you don't think that there's group differences on average between the races?
I think, just to be clear, I think there would be group differences if you took it, like we were talking about, an American versus somebody who graduates college in Europe. There'd be tremendous differences.
Not tremendous, but yeah, there would be slight differences,
yeah.
but you don't
So
think
I
that
think
racially there's differences between races?
I think, yeah, because we have huge differences culturally. So going to your point of saying, I don't want to live in a black neighborhood, well, neither does LeBron James when he gets money, right? There's a reason for that, because there is something that's happening culturally in Black America that's going on for a very long time. But that thing, I would argue, didn't exist in...
What about in Africa and Haiti? I mean, they're killing and eating each other in Africa and Haiti. Everywhere where they are, you have these problems.
Yeah, I'd like to look into, and I'm pleading ignorant, but I've heard some things about what happened in Haiti and what the Clinton Foundation did there. So I think I'd have to look more into the history of Haiti to be able to push back on that at all. I don't think I agree with that.
What about all of Africa then? There's not one country in sub-Saharan Africa that's successful. Not one. They're all least developed countries. They're all failed states.
This kind of reminds me, and we could kind of flesh out this conversation together, and I'm not perhaps ready to have it fully, but I do remember going back to Dave Smith where he was conceding a point on, well, all of these other Middle Eastern countries, no, you wouldn't want to live there, you want to live in Israel. Now in my mind, I'm going, well, could you just keep bombing the crap out of them if they ever try to get ahead? I remember watching this with him saying that, going, why don't these countries get ahead? And kind of going back in my mind to the Gaddafi speech where he keeps speaking essentially about, here's what we got to do in Libya to get ahead, here's what we're going to do with the dollar, and we're going to be progressive and this and that. And they killed him. And then what happened to those Libyan refugees? Suddenly they're now pouring into, just like he said was going to happen, they were now pouring into the European continent, and Europeans are complaining, who are these people? And so the question is, are we allowing, because I'm like, Africa's a pretty rich country, like why aren't Africans controlling the diamond trade? Who's taking all of the diamonds so that they can't control the diamond trade? And how long have these people been doing that, being essentially culture vultures? That's kind of the journey that I've been on now in terms of really trying to go back and look into history to see what's happened. And I never trust myself when I have a perspective now, because I realize how much of my opinions and beliefs were shaped by the public school system. And so I don't think you're right. I think that there has been a very sophisticated effort to, just like you would say now, in terms of people that are intentionally attacking Anglo-Saxons. I'm just learning about that there were these books that were written to, we must genocide the Anglo-Saxons, that were going on for a lot longer than I realized. History didn't begin with World War II, but I think it would take a lot of time to kind of unpack that.
Yeah.
Like, are we stopping people from getting ahead just because, I don't know?
That just sounds, I mean, being honest with you, that just sounds to me like a left-wing argument when they say, why don't these countries get ahead? Colonialism. You're a colonizer. It's like, okay, but when we got there, they had no development. When we got to Africa, they had no technological development.
So you think that even if we weren't at war, and sure, you could say that you think that's a leftist argument. I would only push back on that because I've learned so much about just like recent history that I didn't know. But you think that the Middle East, like if we had done nothing in terms of the Middle East, that they would just be savages and just be like, America didn't do anything he doesn't set anything backwards, you're just like bombing a place.
Yeah, kind of. I think that we did set them back because when they don't have political order, it prevents development and investment and things like that. But, again, when you look at the antecedents of all these, the history didn't start, like you said, with World War II in the 20th century. There's a reason that European civilization created this enormous gap between them and everybody else. And I don't think it was that it was white supremacy or it was unfair or something like that. I think it's because Europeans are smarter.
And if you look at the white redneck culture and the black redneck culture, they have a lot of the same values. They don't particularly respect education. They love Jesus. They use violence in their conflicts. And there's just, a lot of the same values and a lot of the same outcomes. And even Ebonics, which is, Black English, is actually all from the west of England. So it's actually this...
What?
It's from the west of England. So, for example, if you go to places like Cornwall, there used to be these amazing ads on British TV, right, for this Devon custard or whatever, and they would always say, Devon knows how they make it so creamy, and they all talk like this, right? And so it doesn't sound like Black English, but they do say things like, I be doing that, and we be doing this, and you be doing that, and they be doing that. And so there's that use of that copula be, right, where instead of saying I am, you are, he is, she is, they are, they just say I be, you be, we be, they be.
So I want to talk today about just some of the ways that, Thomas Sowell actually, disproves a lot of the racialist propaganda from Nick Fuentes. So Nick is one of those individuals who believes that Africans were completely primitive savages prior to contact by Europeans. And one of his racist tropes is the idea that, there were no multi-storied buildings in Africa before Europeans. Now, this is clearly a lie. We don't have to mention the Great Mosque of Jenny. We don't have to mention the Badamaliba, Tata Somba buildings. We don't have to mention the Fumbam Palace. We don't even have to mention, the Great Wall of Kano, the fortress, to disprove this idiotic claim. Right, there's a myriad of examples of traditional African architecture that debunks, Fuentes' lies. And even Thomas Sowell did not promote the idea that, Africa did not have civilization. Africa did not have, writing scripts and metallurgy and architecture, infrastructure prior to Europeans. His idea, his specific, higher IQ, Black conservative grift was that the civilizations on the African continent were relatively rare, and that the African societies that did prove to be civilized, according to the analysis of Europeans, participated and are responsible for enslaving other Africans, neighboring Africans around them. Right. So if we take a look at, Thomas Sowell's argument, his analysis of the, naval technology of the, Jollof or Wallo Empire and the Niani Empire or Mali, and their, incursions against, the Portuguese, on the Senegal River Valley, when he's examining the evidences of the Nok infrastructural complexes, where he's talking about, the paved roads of Ile-Ife, where he mentions Kano and the Kanem Empire. And he just talks about the different, myriad of Sudano-Sahelian infrastructural development that occurred on the African continent, particularly in West Africa prior to the colonial period. Thomas Sowell is mentioning, this genius to try to say that these are the Black people that we blame slavery on, right? He doesn't want African Americans to identify with these great African empires like Ouagadougou Empire or the Ghana Empire. He doesn't want Africans to identify with the Songhai Empire, right? The greatness of the Songhai Empire. Thomas Sowell's idea was that Black people and Black culture didn't come from these great West African, these West and Central African empires, but it came from the poor whites, the poor peasants of Europe. This is Thomas Sowell's narrative, right? The white liberals and Black redneck narrative. And if you look at some of the decrepit, degenerate elements of the Black society that are a byproduct of the Ma'afa and a byproduct of the genocide and Holocaust that was committed against African people, if you examine this culture, Thomas Sowell related this to European peasants, these white rednecks. Thomas Sowell, he's using the lowlanders of Scotland, right? The scum of the earth that many Europeans, elite Europeans, wanted to ban from the subcontinent. These are the people that they sent to Australia. These are some of the people that they sent to North America, right? To Canada and the United States. These are some of the people that they sent to the Caribbean. These are some of the people that they exported all over the world. They exported them to Azania, right? In Southern Africa. These are the people that they wanted to get rid of. And when these Wignats talk about, mud huts, they're not mentioning that most European peasants in the Middle Ages lived in mud huts. They lived in mud. This wattle and daub, this mud, grass, and sticks. These are the type of buildings that they lived in, right? And most of the North American settlers, to support Thomas Sowell's argument of an export of this lower class, lowland peasant type culture into the Americas, most of the settlers on the West, these white American settlers, built in sod, in turf. This is not a high culture. When a lot of these Wignats, they try to compare, Southern European, Mediterranean architecture to African vernacular architecture, as if a lot of these Western and Northern Europeans, are Mediterranean. They like to say that the Mediterranean isn't a pure white and they're mixed with a lot of the so-called Semitic people and North African people. But then when they want to talk about civilization, they want to claim Rome and they want to claim Greece, these Germanics that the Romans called barbarians. Right. And this is speaking to some of the divide within the European context. Believe it or not, Europeans are divided just like anybody else. But with the colonial period until now, they've been exports on exporting their violence to others. Right. They have an expertise when it comes to exporting their violence onto others. This is what made European societies great, is their ability to genocide and profit from genocide. This is what the historical record shows. So again, The infrastructure, if you look at the infrastructure of the peasants, if you look at their living conditions, these were not superior people. These were people who had a lot of issues. And this is why the Black Death was so rampant. The bubonic plague is because these European peasants were in mud huts, these sod houses, these pit houses, living with animals, living with pigs, living with cows, right? Living with all of the animals of the field, all in one enclosed setting, right? With vermin running everywhere, right? With the pit at the center. This was the living arrangement for the majority of the European population. And this is also why, to a certain extent, the mercantilist class, especially in the era of feudalism, wanted to revolt and establish a so-called free market economy. These are the liberalist revolutions of the 17th and the 18th century and onward. The French Revolution and the American Revolution, quote unquote, continued. And according to the analysis of Gerald Horne, that was actually a counter-revolution because Britain already abolished slavery while they were participating in the illegal slave trade. You're right, they abolished it and they wanted the U.S. to do the same, but a lot of the planters in the U.S. did not want to at that time, right? And you also had Abdul, Almami Kader Khan of Futa Toro, right, in Senegambia, who had, they revolted. They created an anti-slavery revolt and they abolished the slave trade and they abolished the enslavement, right, within that region. And this is what inspired many like Blackstone and many of the most popular, European abolitionists from these Muslims on the African continent. So the history is a lot more in reverse than the propaganda that these white supremacists like to claim, right? They like to compare the architectural situation of the elite, the castles of the elite, which, many castles, according to good scholars in the Africana space and many European scholars, they will actually show you that a lot of the castle architecture is rooted in Happy River Basin architectural systems, right? These Nubian castles and Ethiopian castles that are built into the actual ground, built into the mountain, built into nature itself, right? These are the types of infrastructural development, right, that Africans created, that Africans founded. And you see it from the classical period into the, Sudano-Sahelian zone, of the medieval Wagadu, Niani, Songhai empires, the Wangara Inter-Empire. You also see it in the Congo River Basin and southward, in these other different emanations of the Wangara Empire, right? So the bottom line is, if we look at the comparison of European and African architecture, right, we can see that in most instances, Africa was more advanced, right? And we're using the linear time of Europeans as opposed to the cyclical nature of time for Africans. But at the same period, we have a list of examples. We can show that African architecture was clearly advanced when it comes to the techniques and technology for adobe bricks, right? When it comes to the pile architecture, the refinement of that. When it comes to the social organization of labor, right? Black people, Black African societies were able to mobilize vast amount of labor forces, so-called corvée labor, economically, and had an incredibly advanced social organization and ability to command a large fleet of workforce for projects for the state, right? If we look at from a material science of perspective, Africans had a mastery of adobe bricks and a mastery of earthenware architecture. African architecture had a mastery of environmental design, a mastery of natural cooling technology. African architecture had a mastery of urban planning, meticulously planned sites, right? Like Great Zimbabwe. African architecture had a mastery of volume and area architecture. So if we look at these different elements of medieval architecture in Europe and Africa specifically, we can see that the only element, right, where Europeans could take the nod is through vertical engineering. And this is particularly within the Gothic cathedral, right, or the Gothic architecture. But if you take a look at it, many of the elements of the Gothic architecture actually came from Islam in North Africa, these North African Islamic or Moorish cultures, right? Whether it's the pointed arch, whether it's the ribbed vault, whether it's muqarnas and decorative elements, and on and on and on. So the bottom line is, a clear reading of history. Individuals like Nick Fuentes, these are lowbrow, low IQ, low intelligence, racist conservatives, and more experienced conservatives like Thomas Sowell speak to just the vast variety and diversity of African architectural traditions, right? As opposed to the lifestyle of the European peasants, who, according to Thomas Sowell, exported their culture onto Black people in the Americas. Thomas Sowell is like, Africa has some greatness, but the greatness is these great African societies enslaved other Africans. And we're going to get into why that is a lie in the future video. But again, this is clear. It's clear cut. These white supremacists are promoting false propaganda. We should directly reject it. And it should be really, really easy, especially with respect to some of this that I've presented. That's all I got for y'all on this. I hope to catch y'all on the next one. Peace.
Let's go to Comma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. The drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.